Hi, and welcome to The Long Game, a podcast by Macau Group where we sit down and have raw conversations with talented specialists and people who are passionate about what they do in the built environment. My name is Kelvin, and I lead the team here at Macau. Check us out at macau.com.au to learn more. That's makao.com.au. This is Volume 1, where we explore the ins and outs of energy efficiency in buildings. Today's episode features Darren O'Dea, one of the co-founders at Speckel. Speckel is an online platform that enables users to simplify complex building simulations, navigate the National Construction Code, and vet building product suppliers. With extensive technical experience in building physics, Darren is a board member of the Australian Passive House Association and a former advisor to the Australian Building Codes Board. Leave the door to your mind open and enjoy the conversation. Thanks for making time today, Darren. Looking forward to the conversation about building physics, Speckel, Fabric First, and getting to hear an overview of what you're seeing in the industry and learning more about what you're up to with Speckel.
Cool.
Maybe just to kick off, I think it would be best for the listeners to get to hear more about who you are from your own words.
Okay, cool. Hey guys. My name is Darren. I've been working in the sustainable design industry probably for about 15 years. And of the last 15, probably 10 has been practiced here in Melbourne, Victoria. And I've been fortunate enough to work quite early on in the facade design space, which had a natural affinity to really what is becoming a popularized subgenre of ESD, which is building physics. And building physics is the understanding of air, sound, heat, and all those elements that go through the building envelope. Yeah, I've really just specialized in that space and have gone away from the larger consultancies and doing my own thing. I say gone away from larger consultancies just in terms of directly working for them, but I actually still work with a hell of a lot of large consultancies providing advisory services within this subgenre of building physics because sometimes they don't have the people internally to deliver it themselves. So that's a very quick overview. Anything else you want to know?
Yeah, it's actually something that you've mentioned a few times in that intro, which kind of ties into your title, Chief Building Physicist. Could you elaborate more on how you came about with that title and maybe a little bit of an overview for people who don't know what the term means?
It's Chief Building Physics Nerd. I really came up with it on the spot, to be honest. Okay, I'm going to go out on my own. What am I going to do? Yeah, I've got a bit of a marketing head on me. So it's like, what do I call myself? And I'd been involved in so many design meetings where people hadn't got a clue what I was talking about. They were just like, oh yeah, that dude's just nerding it out in the corner, working out what he's working out.
Yeah.
As long as we get our report, that's all we care about. Mm-hmm. And really, because I've had this sort of almost obsession with building physics and the built environment for quite a long time, I just love the numbers. I love the numbers. By virtue of that, I really became I added on nerd to building physics, and chief is just, I didn't want to record a chief this, chief that in regards to, the CEO type title. So I was like, oh no, reject that. I'll just have something a bit more informal, and I'm an informal guy anyway. I think I have a reputation for being quite, I won't say unprofessional, but I will say I say what I say, and there is an informal twist
to that. Oh, nice. And maybe as just a quick backstory, you said you used to work for larger consultancy. Just a quick overview of your journey from moving from working as a sustainable designer or a facade design consultant to getting into Fabric First, which was first company.
Yeah. Okay.
And then the new transition to Speckel.
Well, I worked for a large. It is actually. I believe it still is the fastest growing facade consultancy globally. A crowd called Inhabit. I actually came down here and I interviewed down here in Melbourne, and I interviewed with Lend-Lease and Inhabit, and I think it was who else? It was Meinhardt, and I was living in Vietnam at the time. And I helped build the Vietnam Green Building Council. So responsible for the development of the rating tools there.
In Vietnam,
yeah. So I was there for a few years. And fortunate enough, Inhabit thought, take a punt on this fella, he can talk. I wasn't really across facades so much at the time. I had very high level knowledge, but I had the interest and certainly had the background knowledge, but not the actual sort of application, the construction understanding. So Anyway, so they brought me in and really just really put me on a bit of a pedestal and said, oh, look, let the guy grow, let him do what he's going to do, and build a team around, I guess, that growing base services that fundamentally became building physics services. It wasn't called building physics at the time, it was called ESD. I wanted to shake off that ESD type I guess, understanding, because ESD is so broad, from planning all the way to commissioning. It can mean anything, to be quite honest. And I want it to be more numerically defined around just what the facade is doing, the building envelope is doing. So it made a lot more sense. Worked with the guys for a long time and then decided, I'm going to go out and do my own thing now, because I wanted a bit more flexibility. I wanted to work on different types of projects. And that's where, really where Fabric First was born. With Fabric First, really, it's a well-known, I guess, concept in the UK, Fabric First. The name comes from effectively putting the building fabric of the building first in terms of a philosophy to drive energy efficiency outcomes. So I really just stole that and renamed my company Fabric First. I don't think anyone owns it. Hopefully they don't. And that's really where it came from. So really just still playing around with numbers, producing reports, but more interested in what's happening in construction. That's my primary interest. I do design, lots of it, but I'm more interested in actually going through design, construction, commissioning of buildings to know that the building that I've been involved with has actually met its requirements and achieved certain accolades. So whether it's Passive House certification, whether it's just a high performance aspiration, that's my game.
Nice. And in your own words, how would you very briefly sum up building physics as a concept for someone who's not very familiar with it?
Yeah, probably just going back to the earlier thing where building physics is really this sort of subgenre of ESD that is more numerically defined, because you're assessing the knowns. So you're working with building physics principles in order to assess sound, air, light, heat, energy flows in general. So it's really just it's still numbers in, numbers out to a degree, but it's about the more detailed assessment of things. To give an example, at a macro level, like an ESD approach may not look at certain junctions of a building, where at building physics approach you will look at those junctions, because those junctions may have a meaningful impact on your building from an internal surface temperature perspective, from an acoustic perspective, that type of thing. So it's really diving down into the details. That is that natural response to someone that's been involved in the facade industry and gone, okay, let's get more out of the performance side of the facade industry. Yeah.
Gotcha. Thanks for that. And before we start to get into the nitty-gritty, just taking a few steps back and zooming out, I'm keen to hear what your bird's eye view of the construction industry from, say, because we're both in the ESD or the sustainable building design space. What's your bird's eye view of what's going on in the industry at the moment, especially with all the new changes coming to the building code? Some of them have already come in 2019, and there's some more coming in 2022.
Yeah, there's lots of pre-COVID and COVID type responses to that question. Yeah, look, the building industry is an interesting space at the moment. We're on a project the other day and we rang around looking for timber trusses. Rang 15 truss companies. None of them would supply trusses anymore because they can't buy timber.
They can't buy timber?
Can't buy timber. The cost of timber's too high.
Oh, wow.
So the economics of building with the COVID means that we've had such demand internally with our closed borders that suddenly we're running out of materials to build with, which is interesting. But
is that supply chain issue?
Supply chain issue, yeah. The classic demand and supply. And it looks like demand has been so great, and some of that you can probably equate that to the availability of affordable housing as well now, because there's definitely issues out there in terms of the affordability. But let's stay on topic. Could rant on for a while. Going back to, I guess, the question about looking at things from above, we've seen this a transition where the National Construction Code, prior to its implementation and becoming mandatory in 2019, it wasn't really doing much from an energy efficiency point of view. It wasn't driving the performance of sustainable outcomes in any way or form. It was really just a bit of a game. There was lots of folk, you and I included, that would have been working in the space of, let's just get it over the line, and that is what it is. But it wasn't driving good outcomes. So 2019 is promising to change that potential for better outcomes in buildings from my perspective, because it brought up that bar quite significantly to mean that effectively you can't really get away with what you could get away with previously in terms of meeting the minimum compliance requirements for energy efficiency. So previously, for example, the National Construction Code has a couple of different pathways, deemed to satisfy or deemed to dissatisfy, which I prefer to call it, and the performance solution pathway. So the performance solution pathway is the flexible approach, deemed to satisfy is the tick box approach, right?
Yeah.
Now, with the NCC 2019, the deemed to satisfy is significantly more onerous. But I guess the hidden agenda there is that the performance solution side of things is also much more onerous too. So they actually both equate to a better degree in order to meet the performance requirements of energy efficiency. So it doesn't matter which way you go now, it's a bit more equal. We'll still go down the performance solution pathway where we can use a certain method, a verification method, in order to get building to comply from an energy efficiency point of view and others. Yeah. But the game isn't quite yet we can just go to single glazing, because that's effectively what it was before. Now at least we're mandating that some buildings can be by default double glazed. Many of them will be. Others will need to be double glazed, thermally broken. In terms of the thermal bridging within walls, prior to 2019 we could just ignore those because they didn't exist. They did exist, of course, but we didn't account for them. Now we can account for them, and then we start to actually resolve back down to what the real performance is more likely to be. So there's not this massive chasm between what we design and what we build and how the building performs, which was there in 2016. Now actually we're resolving that, so we're going into another level of accuracy because 2019 is mandating that we do, and we're going to see this continuing as NCC 2022 comes out. We're going to see more tweaks, more refinement, more in the residential space. Yeah. But we're going to see a continual progression to better quality deliverables, both from our design and construction sector, and the consultancy market is going to need to make sure that they provide those deliverables too. So yeah, look, there's lots of interesting stuff going on. We've also got lots of changes in our industry in terms of looking at these performance solutions. We were just talking offline there a little while ago about how performance-based design briefs now are becoming mandatory in July this year. Yeah. And maybe you want to use this as a pitch for this. This is a really interesting progression in our industry because these design briefs that are now required at some point in the design pretty much stipulate, if you're in a D&C contract, prior to pre-tender, that you must use these specifications in your final build. So it's pushing the fact that there's so much swapping of materiality as you go through a process that it becomes impossible to really track. The government are trying to stop people from changing their design as they go through to construction. Of course, we still will go through a process, but it'll be a more formalised process where we actually understand what the impacts are, because we've got so many issues with poor quality materials being replaced with good quality specifications in the design process. We're starting to see things happen there too, and the fact that the New South Wales building reforms now are coming in soon too, and it effectively mandates the same thing, is that we've got to be more across our specifications far early in the design process in order for us to truly understand what's actually going to be delivered in construction. And because they're building reforms, the building commissioner is now the head honcho, so he can tear into building sites and work out whether people know what they're supposed to be doing, and if they don't, he has certain powers to stop work. So there's going to be very interesting feedback from that process, and it will be interesting to see how the main contractors take that on in terms of both, I guess, the opportunity to be more transparent, but also what happens in terms of, hey, if they do need to change things, and of course they will need to change things, how do they do it, what are the processes? A lot of this stuff is not really defined yet. So there's lots of moving parts here, but we are going through a process where things have got more onerous, things are getting tighter, things are getting more transparent in terms of what we do. I'm hoping all of that leads to better quality buildings, because I think that's what we're all involved in this to do.
True. Yeah, so what do you think are some of the triggers that led to all these changes, the building code and the new introductions like the performance design briefs?
Yeah, look, I think we're all learning. It certainly wasn't the winds changing or someone getting out of the bed with a smile on their face. Since 2010, we've progressively been tweaking things and understanding things in terms of what we need to do to continue to improve buildings. Obviously, we had the major sort of the cladding issues, combustible cladding. That's a big driver, particularly in terms of the performance-based design brief. roof stuff, because that all stems from fire and understanding risks posed by proposed solutions for fire. We've got the structural defects of towers in New South Wales. We've got condensation problems in multi-residential buildings and any buildings with high moisture loads within them. So there's a confounding bunch of things going on that really just means, hey, time for a next step. And also the fact that our buildings are becoming more thermally efficient. And this has an impact as well, particularly on that condensation side of things, where building better and we're trapping in more moisture, more vapor, not getting rid of that properly. So there's the classic sort of pain points that growing industries, particularly the building industry, experiences. And it's happened in the US, it's happened in the UK, it's happened in New Zealand. We're going through something similar, but probably not at quite the same level, because generally from a building physics point of view, at least, our environment is fairly forgiving, as in the climate.
It's varied depending on which state you're in.
Yeah.
Just before we move to the next segment, curious to hear more about two terms that you mentioned in there, particularly around thermal bridging and condensation management. I find that they're not concepts that are widely understood in the industry, especially with the new code mandating that we acknowledge the effects of thermal bridging, for instance. Could you share more about, because I know that's an area that you do tend to specialize in, shed more light on maybe to begin with what condensation management or what thermal bridging is, and maybe what some of the effects of having those things occur in a building.
We can start on the thermal bridging stuff. So the NCC 2019 pretty much took a standpoint that the fact that they would start to reduce thermal bridging. So in this case in point, thermal bridging is deemed to be really some sort of repeat structure within the insulation layer. Let's call it a timber stud, a steel stud. They've just gone, let's focus on this stuff first, because that's the easiest stuff to talk to. So that thermal bridging component is the increased heat flow as a result of your insulation layer being punctured with something. So you've got timber, it's not so bad. Got steel, it's a hell of a lot worse in terms of the overall performance of that wall. So for example, the performance of the insulation has a resistance to thermal transfer. The steel has a resistance there on different levels, and once you take into account the combined effects of them, you get a different overall performance. So the National Construction Code said, let's deal with these repeat thermal bridges. You can get thermal bridges elsewhere, like balcony details, where you've got a continuous slab coming out from directly connected to the conditioned space internally. That could be a thermal bridge. You could get a geometric thermal bridge, which is a corner of a building that isn't quite insulated enough, and it means that you will get heat flowing in a couple of different directions, and so it gets very cold in the corner of the building. So there's multiple thermal bridges out there, but we're really just looking at the most basic ones to start with, and implemented or borrowed a standard from New Zealand and used that standard to start the discussion. So it's interesting because it is a start to the discussion. The standard itself this is where it really get boring. 4214 is the standard. It's embedded in 485.9.2. I told you it was boring. It is fundamentally a weak standard for domestic type wall structure, quite suitable for its current application. That will change over time. It will get tweaked. It will get improved to be a more appropriate point of reference to understand this thermal bridging stuff. It's going to develop. We're going to see more aspirations in that space to understand more different types of thermal bridges, but for now it's just repeat thermal bridges. On the condensation management side of things, this is an interesting one for the market, because formerly we haven't really had to do anything about managing condensation, which is fairly ridiculous in cold climates not to manage condensation, because you have to manage it. It's a major risk. And I think as we've been building more of these multi-residential buildings, which are so poorly considered from a condensation point of view, their volumes are small, still got a certain amount of vapor, moisture within them, coming from the bathrooms, coming from the kitchens. The kitchen is in the dining room. Everything's all in one space. They often only have sliding door systems as opposed to other types of operable windows. There's less of a tendency for people to open those up as opposed to cracking open an awning system, for example, in the kitchen. So because of the type of these constructions, they're just really poorly managing vapor. When they do manage vapor, sometimes they don't even extract to the outside, they just extract to the ceiling, so that the ceiling void. So it's just really lots of poor delivery on the construction side has meant that the condensation management was introduced to resolve some of these issues. And they do it from a wall perspective, from a roof perspective. They're introducing the concept of the fact that, you've got to manage the health risks associated to this. And at this point in time, it's a good, manageable introduction to the subject. But again, that's going to be tweaked over time. We're going to see this change, I'm sure, to be a bit more insightful in terms of what it's trying to manage. Because if you're managing condensation, what are you managing? You're managing moisture. Are you managing the potential for mold? What are you actually trying to manage? We're going to see things change a bit more now, and effectively it's introduced a verification pathway to do these types of things, assess condensation in buildings, particularly from a wall and roof perspective. But hopefully over time that's going to be just replaced with good construction standard detailing, so you don't have to do condensation modelling on every single project, which would be an absolute nightmare. It's just modelling for the sake of modelling. We can get to the point where we've got standard construction details that are perfectly suitable for all applications across Australia. But at this point in time, it's good to see that they're gaining momentum in at least understanding if there is an issue on projects, and that's where we're at, mainly in colder climates. But we are seeing that this condensation management consideration is crossing boundaries into climates that are not in the National Construction Code in terms of its requirements, and also building classes that are not in the National Construction Code in terms of its requirements, because people are now considering condensation as that could actually be an issue in this building. They're actually independently going, well, let's make sure it's not an issue now. So people have woken up to the fact that we have many condensation problems, and they may not appear in the first year, the third year, but 5 years, 10 years, they can become a hidden problem, which if it comes inside the builder's defects period, is going to come back and bite them. So it becomes a hidden cost item down the line. If you're a reputable main contractor and you're building, then you're going to want to make sure that you've at least had this checked by someone. Little growing cottage condensation industry going on at the moment.
And what are some of the impacts of, say, not addressing these issues, whether it's thermal breaching or condensation, for someone who's living in that space?
I think, look, I'm exposed to that space, and one of the impacts I'm seeing is not just the occurrence of something related to condensation, such as mold. That's a problem, but it's also the fact that once people get these problems, they're very hard to get rid of. It's very hard to manage, so you've got these sort of band-aid solutions of putting in dehumidifiers into spaces and trying to get rid of the mold. But once mold is there and it's found something to live on and eat, it doesn't disappear. You've got to get rid of it. Remediation stuff is significant, and people are sensitive to the value of their properties too. People can't sell a property if it's got mold problems, condensation problems. So we're actually seeing in the rental part, there's the industry now, their renters are starting to be covered if they have condensation problems or mold problems in their building, where they can actually go ahead, get it fixed, and just charge the owner of the building now. Because the government seem to have woken up to the fact, and maybe that's a state-by-state level perspective, but there are issues out there, and tenants and stuff need to be protected by this. So there's the value of the property, there's the concern about health, and there is the liability of the main contractor. And we also actually, just as an aside, we actually have condensation issues in construction methodologies that are deemed to be fine from a National Construction Code point of view, particularly balconies. Lots of problems with balconies and condensation, where we're insulating below a balcony, and let's say there's a room that is occupied below that balcony, moisture is just going up and it's hitting the underside of the balcony, and you're getting condensation problems there. So lots of stuff.
Thanks for that breakdown. At this point, may take a slightly different direction. I know you've been involved with some peak bodies. Earlier on, you mentioned Vietnam Green Building Council, Climate Works. You've worked with the GBCA here in Australia, and you're involved in the Passive Association as well. But I'm a little bit more interested in the interaction you had with ABCB in terms of the new NCC code, just to get a feel of what that interaction was about. And
so that was more to do with the National Construction Code. It was a bit of engagement by the ABCB in order to come up with a solution for looking at what is now known as 1.5, and it's a requirement for energy efficiency within the 2019 code. So it's really engaged to master or create a spreadsheet for distribution to designers. It was a bit of a challenge because the spreadsheets are not the sort of thing that you need to be passing over from person to person, design team to design team in this decade. So we shouldn't be doing that, but that was the scope, and it was an interesting piece of work in terms of the ability to understand the basic challenges of the National Construction Code and the things that it was indirectly mandating from a design perspective. So good from that point of view, but challenging to put something out to industry that is going to be a meaningful introduction to practitioners' workflow based on an Excel spreadsheet. There's only so much you can do with an Excel spreadsheet that spits out numbers when the sheet is there to capture information about walls, about glazing systems, about the whole building in order for it to be designed. I fundamentally believe that we shouldn't be designing buildings by spreadsheets. That's effectively what that piece of work aimed to do in order to meet the minimum performance requirements for the building fabric, pretty much, for 2019. So good project, great team I was working with, but in terms of the overall intent of spreadsheets and this decade, I still question the approach. I think we're hopefully going to see more advancements in that space, and of course one of the other projects I've got is a part of that insight,
which is now focusing around the next step of the Fabric First, which is so what gap did you see as an opportunity, or maybe in other words, what big problem is Speckel aiming to solve?
So Speckel is a project that myself and my partner David Carroll has been working on for the last couple of years. Dave's the mastermind behind the code. I'm the industry dude. David and I worked together in the past, and we were both equally frustrated with the go-to approach in terms of how you look at the National Construction Code and how you use it, and where it fits into your workflows and how you can get the most out of it. So we wanted to really take the opportunity at the point where the NCC was introducing something new to go, okay, cool, let's do something that we think is a better approach that looks at the workflows of ultimately gathering information around your building envelope and specifying. That's pretty much what it does, and aims to support the industry to make decisions more quickly in regards to meeting these minimum provisions that are set forth in 2019. So Speckel is a platform that aims to do that via looking at your wall systems, your roof systems, your floor systems, glazing systems, and the whole building. And it's a very elaborate, I think Dave was telling me it was about 60,000 lines of code so far, and that's after it's been refined. It was probably much bigger at one point. It's a super interesting project, and it's just about to release a lot more interest in the market, I'm sure, because we're adding automated full-scale simulations to Speckel that will effectively enable what is called a JV3 model to be, instead of taking 3 days, it could take an hour. So a major change to how we approach compliance and how we add specification into a project. So we're trying to do multiple things: improve workflows, make things clearer in terms of what the design intent is, and reduce costs on projects related to compliance.
It sounds like a powerful tool that's doing several things. Has it been easy, or has it been, would you say, challenging?
It's been really easy.
Because it sounds like you have 3 different things that you're working on. So you have the suppliers on one end, and then you have the end user, the engineers or the architects. And then you have the tool itself, where you have the workflow management and the building assessment. So it's just curious, because it's been two years now.
It's had various stages of development. Up front, I worked with some, and continue to work with some really progressive suppliers that have seen the value of the transparency in which Speckel brings to them, and the fact that they don't need to deal with anything anymore. An example, maybe Kingspan or Knauf or DC Tech, they're all providing insulation type solutions, and they can provide the whole solution in terms of the wall solution, the roof solution, or the floor solution, whatever. Put it into Speckel, and so the user just goes, okay, click solution, done. So it's already predetermined, everything's calculated for them, and because we're third party, we are ultimately a transparent way for them to go, yeah, cool, look, you can do this on Speckel, and those reports can be provided to your building surveyor, and is a part of that performance-based design brief that we were talking about earlier. Yeah, lots of challenges come with that because you're managing lots of other people's data. Like you need to know, hey, this supplier is providing me with this. Is it correct? Is it up to date? Has it been done with the latest version of the standard? You become the police a little bit of the data behind the products on Speckel. So that's one challenge. We didn't really imagine that we'd become the police of specification, but to some degree we have, because not all suppliers have maintained a position on Speckel. Some suppliers have been taken off of Speckel because of the fact that we couldn't be sure that what was being given to us was actually legitimate. There was something wrong with the numbers. We've actively just taken them off of the platform, and that's a part of agreement. If you don't provide the actual values, and then when they're audited, that if they're not fine, then either the products get removed or the company gets removed. So challenges, definitely that's one of them. Dave's in a better position to talk to this, but the complexity of the platform in terms of how we continually build it, integrate all the apps together, the reporting side of it, the ongoing testing side of everything is continually tested on Speckel. The debugging of things, fairly standard in terms of software development. But yeah, it is a massive challenge, and we're dealing with lots of unknowns as well. National Construction Code does not specifically state every single assumption that you need to make. That's a bit of a challenge, because sometimes we've gone, well, we've got to make our best decision on what we think is the most appropriate. And that's where we're probably just veer on the side of caution or a little bit conservative in those types of decisions. And what else in terms of complexities? Probably the market side of things as well. We put forward a platform that is relatively low cost in terms of the value that it provides, but we're dealing with a platform that's been developed through COVID that we haven't been able to directly interface with how we would have prior to COVID, that we can't just walk into an architectural engineering office anymore, that those things are not as done anymore. We've got a tendency to just talk on Teams or Zoom. So we're dealing with all that sort of stuff too. So yeah, lots of challenges, that's for sure, but we're still here after COVID. Thank you to the government who saved us.
And still going. And from an end user perspective, what are some, say, maybe 2 to 3 low-hanging fruits, like someone just jumped on the tool? What are some of the key benefits that someone would have in terms of assessing a project using Speckel? And then a follow-up to that would be, is there a hidden feature that maybe a power user would discover? So
look, it's got a freemium approach to it, so anyone that jumps on there is going to get value from it. So free. You can pay money to go on to the practice levels, but free is probably the first benefit. It's super fast. It's super fast, and it's verified. Everything is verified in the back end. So you produce a report on Speckel. It's a solution against the National Construction Code. So, fast, and you can produce reports for free. Did I mention free? Then I think they're probably some of the big benefits. And then, as you're alluding to, that there is lots of other benefits on there too. Once you're paying on a monthly basis, you pay on a 30-day basis, and access to more advanced calculations in terms of looking at shading devices, looking at condensation stuff. By next month, you can be looking at whole building simulation. So major value add just on the table now. And that's going to be, I think that's going to be what we think is an absolute game changer, both for resi and commercial buildings. Was it $199 a month? It's going to, you can do a JV3 model instead of 3 days, 1 hour. If that doesn't put more bums on seats, I don't know what will.
And the user experience is really good as well, because I've played around with the tool in a few of internal projects. Is that something that you guys keep on top of mind?
Keep tweaking it, cutting back. You just keep pulling back to the point where you're just giving the bare bones in terms of the user is by default exposed to, and then you're trying to create another level for those more experienced users. You're trying to make sure that the user experience is not too scary, because users are fickle. People jump on and go, no, don't like it, bye. I'm out of here. We all do it, whether we like it or not. Well, most of us do it. So we're always pulling back, even on the new stuff, the JV3 stuff, how clean the interface is. It's unbelievably clean for the complexity of the stuff that's done in the back end, and the reason it's so clean is because we automate everything. So we don't make you go through any decision that you don't need to go through. It just doesn't make any sense to us. If we can make an assumption on your part, we'll make an assumption, and then you can go ahead and tweak that, change that, but everything's automated, so it cleans things up. Dave is constantly developing, I guess, overall strategies for cleaning up the interface.
Nice. And would you say Speckel is more of a compliance tool, a design tool, or a little bit of both?
It's a little bit of both. What we'll see now over this year is the compliance stuff. Yeah, sure, we'll charge ahead, do that. It's the low-hanging fruit, if you like. And then what we'll continue to do is just add on the design side application to it. Because we don't want Speckel to be a tool just for compliance, because that's boring. There's other things to do. We want Speckel to be very convenient for compliance. So you can do it quickly and then go and do some other stuff. So if you've got a scope of $5,000 or $10,000 to do some consulting, whatever that is, you jump on there, do what you need to do, and then add more value to the project in other ways. So that's design side value add. So that's what we want it to do, and that's what we're going to be striding towards the end of the year, because that means that you've got a base user which is compliance focused, but then you also got those more advanced users that actually want to optimize their design to go beyond the National Construction Code. And that's important, because National Construction Code is the minimum performance requirements to build. It's not major accolades in any way. It's the minimum requirement. We've got to go far further if we're going to meet requirements to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions at a local level to contribute to the global level.
Yeah. And as we start to wind down, so where would you say, in a snapshot, Speckel is at the moment, and in terms of maybe the near future, say the next 12 or so months?
Yeah, I think Dave and I were talking about this recently. It's like, where's Speckel at now? It's just starting to get where we want it to be. So it's taken 2 years to get it to just where we wanted it to be. We've got no angel investors behind us. We're running at our own speed here. And so we're just getting it to the point where we're happy with it. And we know what it's doing, all the calcs and stuff, that's not an issue. But in terms of the quality and the value add and the increased amount of people coming on every day and the increased amount of interest from the supply chain, it's just getting there now that it's becoming this manageable thing that on a month-by-month basis, we're not sweating things out in terms of whether we're going to have enough people on there, that sort of thing. It's stabilised. So it's just got to the point now, a couple of years in, where it's stabilised. And it would take another while to really lift off, but I think these applications that are just about to be dropped onto Speckel are really going to help those users that are not quite sure whether it's enough value for them yet.
Yeah, gotcha. Looking forward to catching up maybe in 12 months' time just to see where Speckel's at that point. And just maybe the last two questions, which just moving away from the technical side of things. Are there key people in the industry or a key person in the industry that you either follow, find interesting or insightful?
I haven't seen an awesome amount of content being produced recently. I don't know whether you found the same. I used to produce more content myself, and I just haven't had the time to produce it. I'd say definitely, there's local folk that are extremely good at what they do. Who jumps to mind? There's a guy called Jesse Clark. He's at a company called ProClimber. They sell membranes. Other stuff, I'm sure Jesse will be far more articulate about what they sell, but he's a great mind in terms of the building physics side of things. Then an old friend of mine, Samantha Anderson, who's based in Brisbane, she's in Habit, and she's awesome because she's such an energy, and she is very knowledgeable and has been pushing the envelope in terms of both using her own knowledge to advance industry and doing it in practice too. So a couple of people that spring to mind, and there's some architect I work with quite often, a guy called Dylan Brady. He does some awesome builds. He designed the Pixel building, and we're working on some projects together. Really force difficult decisions to be made every single time we have a conversation, and that's really cool. It's really hard, but it's really cool because it means that progressively what we're achieving is quite major. And then a bunch of people in they've got a soft spot for the passive house space, and a bunch of folk in that space are doing some amazing stuff on a very active board for the Australian Passive House Association, and there's some great people there doing some advocacy and technical review and just using their network of contacts to broaden the scope of passive house being introduced as a viable sort of net zero strategy for buildings. So probably too many to mention there, to be quite honest, but there's a very strong board. So lots of folk there. Look, there's loads of people out there doing stuff, and I think we've probably just contracted in terms of our comms now over the last year with COVID, right? So you're not exactly sure what else is going on out there anymore. You see something on LinkedIn, you go, oh, okay, great. Pretty picture, LinkedIn, that's fantastic. But not knowing the actual sort of details of things, I guess that's the bit that some of the knowledge that's been, not knowledge sharing, that hasn't quite happened as much. But I think, I'm sure there's plenty of awesome stuff going on out there.
And yeah, last question would be if a listener is keen to either see your work or find you online, where can they find you?
Yeah, cool. Obviously, LinkedIn, fabricfirst.com.au, speckel.io. Yeah, just put in Darren O'Dea, O''D', ESD. I don't want that bit, but you'll find me. I'm not hard to find.
Yeah, awesome. All right. Thanks again for making time today, and really enjoyed the conversation. And I'm sure it's not the last one because there are some things that we did touch on today that I believe can really be expanded on or elaborated on. And yeah, so I'm looking forward to a future conversation.
Clear.
Thanks, Darren.
Thanks.